Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. The Pybus Public Market is pleased to offer a series of unique and fun classes for the Wenatchee Valley community. Classes are taught by local volunteers with an interest and aptitude in the subjects that they teach.
Okay, well, hi everybody, thanks for coming. Some of you I recognize, some I don't. Wenatchee's a small town. So this is actually a photo from a Homestead Ranch looking down over towards Kashmir. Of course, in May when the flowers are out. So Wenatchee, the fountain of youth. So what I'm going to tell you today is that to be fully functional into your 80s, you need to work at it. And that may sound obvious, but I think most of us forget that. Your body doesn't know aging, it only knows growth, which is remodeling, or decay. Vigorous exercise, 6 days per week, will literally make your body physiologically younger than it is today. You are a mammal, a pack animal. You must love, cuddle, and participate in awe and wonder, or life will kill you. Eat food, not too much, mostly green. And we have chosen to live in the perfect spot to exercise vigorously, participate in awe and wonder, love, and play hard. So I'm going to go through my rules for longevity, and this is sort of the heart of the talk. And these rules are exercise hard 6 days a week. You got to mix it up, you got to make it fun. You need to do aerobic exercise 4 of those days. You need to do weights 2 of those days, and you need to have a group or play activity at least 1 of those days during the week. You need to use a monitor. You need to get limbic. You need to love, cuddle, play, or perish, and intimacy is not optional. I think in our current culture we forget that sometimes. Only eat real food. Grocery shop around the periphery. I'll explain what I mean by that. And don't eat anything brighter than the sun. I learned that from my father. 1 BHAG each year, 1 major outing each month. Caveat emptor, my sister Joan has a PhD. We call her Dr. Kazi. And she pointed out to me that not everybody in the room would speak Latin. So caveat emptor means buyer beware. Most of what I'm going to tell you are actually gross simplifications of very, very complex processes. And there's still more right than not. Anybody medically sophisticated in the crowd will be able to cite contradictions to many of the things I'm going to say, and I'm still more correct than not. And anybody in the audience over the age of 70 who's living in a body which is physiologically about 50 will agree with what I'm teaching today. As was mentioned, I am a primary care provider. The basis for this lecture is my 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, adding up to 12 years of college, and then 25 years of primary care. So I teach this stuff to my patients every day. I don't recognize anybody in the room as a patient, but if you had been, you'd be nauseated with me always talking about exercise. I also have 55 years inside this body, personal experience with stress and eating and exercise and loving and kids and running a business and feeling younger. And finally, I'm going to reference several books. These will also be at the slide at the end. This is a book which another medical director in the state introduced me to a couple of years ago. And this was one of sort of the 2 books in my life where I've read it and it's sort of just been an epiphany. And both of them were because it was things I had already learned through hard trial and effort, which had been beautifully encapsulated. So this book is called Younger Next Year, and it goes through a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today. A General Theory of Love, which is this book. Super interesting look at the evolution of love and the neurobiology of love and why we love and what it's all about. Love and Survival by Dean Ornish. Believe it or not, he's a cardiologist. And In Defense of Food. How many of you have read Michael Pollan? Most of you. Awesome, incredible author. You should read all of his books. So let's start off talking a little bit about how your body works. When we think of our bodies, we relate them to things that we know, and we know machines, right? So when we think about arthritis, when we think about our joints, we tend to think about things like this. And when we think about machines, we know that they wear out through excess use. And so I think most of us have in our mind an idea that if we run 50 miles through the hills, as my friend Chad in the back of the room did a few weeks ago, you're going to end up with a hip joint that looks like this. And what I'm going to teach you today is exactly the reverse is true. We are organic. We are not machines. In fact, we're more like a starfish than we are like a machine. And this little starfish, if you remember the story about how you can cut a starfish in half and it'll grow back into 2 starfish, you can see this little guy was chopped with just 2 of the original legs, and now he's growing 3 more new legs. And this is, obviously humans can't regenerate like this, but we do regenerate a huge amount. We regenerate skin and hair and nerves and all sorts of different tissues. But I want you to have in mind that we are more starfish than we are machine. Our bodies improve with use. They remodel. We're going to talk about this. And they rebuild to meet whatever sort of demands you put on them. And this is the key. Vigorous exercise releases growth factors. And those growth factors circulate throughout your whole body, and they give the instruction that it needs to remodel and rebuild and actually create tissues, replacing the tissues you have now with younger tissues. And that's why I say you become physiologically younger. So during childhood, I think we're all comfortable with the fact that we change, right? We grow and our shape changes, our legs shape are different, our face changes over time, and we just anticipate that as we grow, that happens all the time, and that's part of childhood. And we get to 18 years old or so, and we figure that process just stops. And that's wrong. That process continues every single day of your life. You are continually remodeling until the day you die, but we don't sense that. The body you are living in now is almost completely new since last year. Sorry about that. And this painting helps me remember this, and I don't quite know why, but I love this painting. This is the guy who paints the Golden Gate Bridge. And if you know the story of the guy who paints the Golden Gate Bridge, he starts at one end of the bridge, and he paints all the way to the other end of the bridge. And by the time he gets to the other end of the bridge, he has to come back and start again, because the paint at the beginning is worn off, right? And so continuously repainting and keeping the bridge up to speed. And that's what your body is doing, continuously turning over worn out tissues with younger tissues. Your muscles turn over 1 cell at a time about every 4 months. So I want everybody to grab and reach up and grab your bicep muscle. The muscle you're feeling right now is completely 100% different than the muscle you had in that arm in January or December. Bones turn over every 2 years. And I think that's really hard to imagine. We've got these huge, tough bones inside our body, and they swap out every 2 years. How do you swap out a bone? It doesn't seem to make sense, right? Your body is continually reshaping itself, remodeling to fit what you are asking of it.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
And so the question is, will next year's body be better than today's body? What can you do today so that this ongoing process of remodeling is going to make next year's body better, younger than today's body, more fit? All right, so that idea that your bones swap out to me is a little bit crazy. And so this is a picture I love because I want to talk to you about these guys. This is a chunk of bone under a microscope. And this little guy up here sort of looks like scrubbing bubbles. This is called an osteoclast. And the osteoclast is a little cell that cruises along the surface of the bone, grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding and taking off the top layer of bone. And then these little guys, called the osteoblasts, come along behind it, and they lay down new bone. And then these guys back at the end are sort of smoothing it out. Does this remind anybody of anything that's been going on in Wenatchee in the last 3 months? Right? It's exactly the same as this. So here's the machine that runs down the road and grinds off the asphalt. And then here's the machine in which we put the fresh asphalt that then lays down the new layer. And then here are the guys that go through and smooth it off. Same process. So if you can imagine that, and of course we think about the outside of the bones. These osteoclasts are on the inside of the bones and all throughout the bones, right? Turning them over all the time. And for the ladies in the crowd, this osteoclast, the machine that grinds up the road, it is fueled with estrogen. And so if you don't have estrogen, your bones stop turning over, and at that point you develop osteopenia and osteoporosis. All right, let's talk a little bit about evolutionary baggage. So right now, each of us lives inside an adaptive miracle, right? This adaptive miracle has been developed over the millennium into what it is now. And it comes with certain rules. One of those rules is your body always wants you to seek rest. You're running around, you're busy. What do you want to do? You want to sit down and put your feet up. Always seek food. Whenever possible, seek high energy food, so fat and sugar. Store energy when food is plentiful. This may not be obvious, but we're going to talk more about why that's true. When you got a lot of food around, your body's going to store it. And store energy when you're at rest. So let's go back and think a little bit about life in the Pliocene era, life on the savanna. So here we are maybe in the Wenatchee Valley 100,000 years ago. And humans had to walk about 10 miles a day. So they had to go down to the river and bring water back. They had to collect wood for fire. They had to forage to find things to eat. So your body is designed to walk 10 miles a day. How many people today have walked 10 miles? Not a single one of us. Maybe one of us in the room has walked 10 miles. Every single day, 7 days a week. That's what your body's designed for. And so back on the savanna, we were always moving, right? Always collecting, hunting, migrating. Prolonged rest back then only happened during times of famine or in the winter. So if your body isn't moving, your body thinks it must be wintertime or thinks there must be a famine going on. So your body also has an evolutionary imperative to prepare for famine by minimizing energy burn. So that rule about always seeking rest, you don't want to be hunting, you don't want to be exercising if there's no food around. And there's also an imperative to remodel the body into the smallest size possible. Your body wants to conserve energy. So your body's going to prepare for winter by storing energy. So this is what I was saying before. If there's a lot of food around, your body actually has an evolutionary drive to store it. So when you're eating and food is plentiful, you're going to start packing it on for the winter. And when food is abundant, eat. Your body's going to actually drive your appetite. When you have more food in front of you, it's going to drive your appetite. And that's completely counterintuitive, right? What we think is we go and we eat, we get full, we don't eat anymore. But in fact, your appetite is driven when you're eating more. All right, what are the 21st century consequences of those evolutionary rules? Well, the first is that right now, rest or inactivity is basically the norm, right? It's the default condition. So your body's going to assume that at all times, if you're not out walking 10 miles a day, there's a famine going on, or it must be wintertime. And your body is going to remodel you into the smallest size possible because it wants to conserve energy. Now, what we all want in the modern age is to burn off all that food we've eaten as fast as possible. But our body's not going to do that because we're resting, and so it's going to shrink us down to conserve energy. So food right now is plentiful, and I know that for not everybody in our community, food is plentiful, but in general, relative to having to go and kill a wildebeest, food is pretty darn plentiful. And there's a lot of high energy food. And so your body stores energy as fat, and it drives your appetite when food is plentiful, which then drives more eating. So the result is minimal muscle mass in the modern age, minimal fitness, and maximal fat, right? So this is basically the consequence, the natural state of our 21st century Western man. This is the Netflix binging world in which we live. So, my question is, what are your plans for the future? And I think what most of us would say, when I ask my patients, what are your plans for the future? Most everybody says, I want to live to be 100, then I want to die in my sleep. Most people say, while I'm alive, I want to be completely active and enjoy myself absolutely as much as possible. And so active, 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 die. That's the goal. So this is sort of a graph of that. And so what this graph is showing along the bottom here is the age, and this is health or fitness or function. And in essence, we start out young, and our fitness and healthiness is maximized between maybe ages 20 and 40, and then we gradually decay and decay until we die. Now, if you look at this other curve over here, this is what studies reveal in what are called master athletes. So these are people who take exercising incredibly seriously. They exercise all the time, and they're very fit. And you look at the curve, you look at the curve that they have, and it's that curve we all want, right? You're fit, 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 die. And so again, this is the basis of this talk. If you're going to live well into your 80s and beyond, we need a huge amount of exercise and these other things I'm going to talk about. We want to move everybody from this black curve over to the gray curve. All right. So the secret to living to be 100, exercise, exercise, exercise. Eat real food, not too much, mostly green. We're going to talk about active relaxation. I think for people who live in Wenatchee, this is probably easier than in other places. And I'm going to talk about the importance of limbic connections and staying involved. All right, so my question then is, how is each of you going to remodel your lifestyle, today's lifestyle? And remember also that I'm painting a target here. So I'm going to ask you to do a bunch of stuff, and you might say, that's impossible, I can't imagine it. That's a target. Set that out there a year or two, but then you have to be working towards it, and you have to work towards it fairly relentlessly. So you're going to have to start this week, and you're going to have to keep working at it. All right, I'm going to ask you to accept these mind shifts, these paradigm shifts. Again, we're going to talk about active relaxation. And most people, if I said active relaxation, people say that's an oxymoron. That doesn't make sense, right? We think about rest, relaxation, immobility, sitting with our feet up. And what I'm going to be teaching you today is that is bad. Active relaxation is getting away from the stress of your work life and everything else. You have a day off. You're not going to sit on the couch. You're going to be exercising and appreciating the valley. Arthritis is a disease of the sedentary. Now, I am fully aware that probably 75% of the people in this room have arthritis. I have arthritis. So I'm not trying to make fun or belittle arthritis, but I want you to think about arthritis in a new way. And so arthritis is a disease of the sedentary. We're going to talk more about that. Fatigue is caused by sedentary stress. Most of my patients, when I tell them you need to get out and exercise more, they say, oh, I can't. I get home at the end of the day and I'm so completely wiped out. There is no way, doctor, that I could possibly exercise. And I want to make the distinction between fatigue, which is a mental process, and feeling tired, which is a physical process. And hunger is caused by sedentary eating. We're going to talk about that.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
All right, active relaxation. So dishwashers, TV remotes, microwaves, the internet, all make life more efficient, right? And they allow us to exercise more. Exactly right. So this is active relaxation in the Wenatchee Valley. So this is my lovely wife, Cherie, who's in the back of the room. And this is my lovely wife, Cherie. This is up on Homestead Ranch, and then floating down the Wenatchee. And so on a day off, this is what I need you to be doing, active relaxation. So arthritis is a disease of the sedentary, and this picture is super powerful to me. In 1998, I had the opportunity to go down to the state of Michoacan in Mexico. And I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but most of the Hispanics, most of the Mexicans who live in Wenatchee come from the state of Michoacan. And so some physicians from down there came up here, and some of our physicians went down there so that we could check out the healthcare systems and the differences between the two of them. And what was amazing to me is that this is sort of the typical street. And look at that picture, and what do you see? You see everybody walking, right? There are no cars on that street. And the other thing you see is a couple of guys carrying great big loads of sticks. Now, what you cannot see is that this guy is a silver-haired dude in his 70s. And I saw him walking past with this great big load on his back, and I was like, what? How is that possible? Because in my practice, I have gentlemen who are 30, 40, 50 years old who are permanently disabled related to back disease and to arthritis. They've worked as truck drivers and as sheet rockers and as metal workers, and they just tell me their joints have completely worn out. And then I travel to Mexico, and here's this dude day after day after day walking 10 miles with a bushel of sticks on his back. And they don't have a healthcare system like we do. So how on earth is that possible? And as I'm going to teach you, it's possible because we've had the wrong idea about arthritis. All right, non sequitur. What's the best way to survive cancer? Don't get it, wrong answer. What's the best way to survive cancer? Exercise, be positive, diet. The best way to survive cancer is to be in really good shape when you get cancer. So what's the best way to survive injuries to your joints? And it's the same answer. Have really strong joints when you get those injuries. And that's why we need to start thinking about arthritis as a disease of the sedentary. The problem is there's this vicious cycle that happens. People who are sedentary and have sedentary lifestyles have weak joints. And those weak joints are more susceptible to injuries. And once they're injured, they hurt. And when they hurt, you're more sedentary because you can't get up. And you get a vicious cycle where the joints get weaker and weaker and eventually they wear out. If you lived in Mexico where you didn't have a choice but you had to get up and walk to work and carry those sticks, even though you had sore joints, they would get better. In this country, we're allowed to sit down and then we have to see our orthopedic friends who replace those joints for us. Exercise today will encourage repair of existing damage, and exercise today will build stronger joints to survive future injury. Rest is bad for your joints. This is the take-home message. All right, fatigue is caused by sedentary stress. Exercise does not cause fatigue. As we initiate exercise until we're warmed up, your bodies are saying, don't do it, rest. Remember, rest is the imperative, and it makes you feel tired. But once you're up to operating speed, once you've started to sweat a little bit and you're in the zone, you forget about feeling tired. I challenge any of you, the next time you're out exercising, check it out. Because at first you're like, oh, this sucks, it's so hard. But then after about 15 minutes, you're thinking about other things. You're thinking about, the road in front of you, or you're thinking about where the boat's going, or you're thinking about this thing you have to do this afternoon. You're completely not thinking about how your body feels. And then after moderate exercise, we actually feel energized and refreshed. You don't feel tired. So again, I challenge you, next time you're doing some moderate exercise, when you get home, you're going to be all buzzing and ready to do stuff. So that's, again, completely different than the way most of us think about exercise. We think, oh, we exercise, it makes us tired, right? It makes us fatigued, and that's not true. So fatigued, that feeling of being drained, comes from hours of mental strain without an associated hunt, without exercise. So there's this great book called Brain Rules. Anybody read this? About 3 or 4 of you, probably the teachers in the room. So John Medina is a psychologist at the University of Washington. And he's done a lot of studies of the brain and how we remember things and how we can teach people things. And one of the things he's found is that people retain information better if they learn it while they're moving. So actually, in the middle of a lecture, what we should do is have everybody stand up and do some jumping jacks and then sit back down, and you will actually retain more information than if you don't move. And why is that? And that's because our brains were designed to hunt. And so you have hyperacuity and you remember everything that's going on in the middle of a hunt. And so the sedentary stress, so trying to focus your brain without the exercise, is what makes us feel tired, because that's not what we were designed to do. Headache, sore upper back, eye strain, frustration, irritability all relate to sedentary stress. So we know this guy, I know this guy. You come home after a long day with a computer, or maybe taking a drive to Seattle with 3 or 4 screaming kids in the car. That is the feeling of sedentary stress and fatigue. All right, hunger is caused by sedentary eating. I want to tell you a story about a trip Sheree and I took last week down to New Orleans. New Orleans is a fantastic place. I had a conference down there for a week, and this is what we had every day for breakfast. These are grits, and these are eggs. Now, at my house here in Wenatchee, I have scrambled eggs every day for breakfast, and the scrambled eggs will typically get me all the way through to lunch at around noon. And I had these grits and eggs, and what's that floating on top? Butter. And by about 11 o'clock, I was famished. And Sheree was kind enough to meet me, and we'd find another funky restaurant in New Orleans, and we'd go and have some delicious Louisiana shrimp floating in butter. And we'd eat that, and typically at lunch I have some leftovers. I'm good until 6 o'clock till dinner rolls around. By about 4:30, I was starving. So then we go out to a lovely restaurant, have some more beautiful fish floating in butter, and by about 10 o'clock at night, I was famished. And so this again is because I was sitting around in a conference all day, and I was eating about 3 times as many calories as I usually eat, and I was hungrier. So hunger is caused by sedentary eating. And why is that? Remember that evolutionary baggage I was talking about? So when food is abundant, we have to store it as fat. And when food is abundant, our appetite is driven to make us pack it on. It's like it's springtime, and we're putting on fat to survive the winter.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
All right, let's talk about all the good reasons to exercise. So again, your body doesn't know aging. We see aging because we have clocks. Your body doesn't have clocks. So all it knows is growth or decay. And it'll adapt to anything you ask it to do. Remember, it's turning over all the time. It's remodeling you all the time. So daily exercise is going to allow daily exercise in growth. Rest is only going to allow more rest, decay. And remember, you're not a machine, right? You're organic. You're like the starfish. Exercise is your natural state. 10 miles a day is what your body's designed for. Exercise will cause remodeling and make you physiologically younger, and exercise will not wear out your joints. So, vigorous exercise 6 days a week releases growth factors that make you younger, makes you stronger and protects you from injury. We talked about that with the joints. Builds aerobic and cellular fitness, so bigger lungs, heart. Decreases fatigue, improves mood, makes you sexier, improves sleep, and staves off cancer and diabetes and heart disease and arthritis. As a primary care provider, people come in to see me all the time. I'm so tired. There's got to be something wrong with me. Please do a workup. And I say, well, how much do you exercise? I can't exercise. I'm too tired to exercise. And the point is, that's the problem. Sitting around and being sedentary is the problem. Sitting around and not exercising increases your risk of cancer, causes obesity, increases the risk of diabetes, increases the risk of heart disease. All right, so vigorous exercise tells your body it's springtime and that you are hunting. Remodeling is required. I need to be more fit. I need more strength, more mental clarity. And you've got to be sending it that signal every single day. Because remember, it wants to revert to the lowest energy state possible. So vigorous exercise releases growth factors, increase muscle mass and bone strength, increase cardiopulmonary, that's your heart and lungs capacity, increase blood vessels. So as you're growing these big muscles, the blood doesn't get there all by itself. You need bigger arteries, bigger veins, more capillaries. Increase mitochondria within each cell. And then stem cells, which live in all of our tissues, get turned on and activated to start repairing things, replacing things, and rebuilding things. So, how to exercise? When I mention to my patients who aren't, gym rats, I need you to go down to the gym and start working out, this is what everybody thinks of, right? This is what everybody's worried about. I'm going to get down there, and I don't know if you can see in the back, but the steam that's in there, and here are these nice young people looking sexy. That's not what I'm talking about for exercise. I'm also not talking about this, right? This is what we see on TV. Here are these animals who are doing this thing, and everybody says, I couldn't possibly do that, and I wouldn't want to do that, and so I'm not going to exercise. I'm talking about this. This is a group out of the Wenatchee Row and Paddle Club in the confluence with their kayaks. This is a group, some of you will recognize them, who are working out at the rack. And this is somebody working out at the rack. So these are smiling, happy, older people who don't look like that first couple. All right, here's the goal. This is my big ask of you. I need you to exercise 6 days a week, 1 hour every day, hard enough that you are sweating and you need to change your clothes. I need you to do 4 days aerobic, 2 days of weights, and 1 day in a group. I need you to do it outside whenever possible. I need 1 major outing per month. That's a 3-hour or more adventure, and 1 BHAG per year. So remember, you are not shooting for a beach body. Those of us over the age of 50, or those of us who hope one day to be over the age of 50, we're not shooting for a beach body. We're shooting for longevity. And to get longevity, you've got to make exercise sustainable. To make exercise sustainable, it's got to be fun. You got to do it with friends. And as much as possible, you got to do it outdoors. So this is up above Leavenworth. And here's my big ask. Get a heart rate monitor. How many people in the room own a heart rate monitor? Wow, That's impressive. That's half the room. Good for you. So I guess I'm preaching to the choir here. Who knew? All right, get a heart rate monitor. And if you're timid, start with an iPhone or a Fitbit. So I'm assuming at least half the room has an iPhone. And on your iPhone, if you're not aware, if it's in your pocket all day long, you can open up the app that has a heart on it, and it'll just show you this. This is mine. This shows me I've taken 3,900 steps today. I've walked 1.9 miles. That up there was what I did on the 13th of October. That's with you all the time. You can look at it and start using it just to figure out how it works. You could try a Fitbit, which is something you wear on your wrist and will measure the same data points and then share it with your phone. And then as you get more excited, then you can go for the chest strap. So this is the MyZone belt. I'm going to talk about that more in a little while. But that's by far and away the most accurate type of heart rate monitor. How many people in the room are old enough to remember the original Star Trek and the Universal Translator? Remember that? So the Universal Translator was this thing that they pulled out when they walked into a room of aliens, right? And they had to be able to communicate with them. And as long as they were talking in the room and Captain Kirk was holding that thing, everybody could understand each other. So the monitor is like that Universal Translator because it's extremely hard to judge how hard you are working while you're working out. After a while, if you've been using a heart rate monitor, you can kind of figure it out and you know where you are. But to calibrate yourself is tough, especially as you're getting started and your fitness is improving. So a monitor allows you to track that. It allows you to track your exercise, your workouts, and compare them to each other. It allows you to calibrate sort of how hard today's workout was relative to yesterday's. It also, and I'll show you this, it allows you to compare yourself to friends and how other people are working out. And it allows you to push yourself that much harder. So how does it work? Physicians and you can estimate your maximum heart rate. So you take 220 and subtract your age, and that'll give you your theoretic maximal heart rate. So if you are 40 years old, 220 minus 40 is 180. In theory, you can get your heart rate up to 180. I'm 55. My maximum heart rate, in theory, should be about 165. But what I can tell you, because I follow these rules, my maximum heart rate's 180. So what that means is physiologically, I'm 40 years old, but my body is 55. And so that's another reason that these monitors are fun to work with, is you can sort of monitor your fitness and your age dropping. So once you know your maximum heart rate, the heart rate can be broken down into zones, sort of easy, moderate, hard, and super hard. And during a workout, this is sort of what you want to see. And so what you see, if I can point at it, the gray here, this is just at rest. And then this is the warm-up that I was talking about. This is when my body is telling me to sit down and stop being an idiot. And then you get up into the zone, and you're up here in the 75 to 80% of maximum heart rate zone. And then for a few minutes during the workout, you should sprint. You should really go for it and do about 5% super hard. And all exercise counts, all right? That's a vigorous exercise, one of those 1-hour exercises every week. But I want you also at times to go out and do a 3-hour epic, right? Maybe you're going hiking or doing something else. And so this is a walk in Sage Hills. And there are times when you're going uphill and times when you're going downhill. But during these times of exercise, you're still replenishing yourself and healing and meditating, and you're clearing out your brain of all the negative energy from the day. So all exercise is good.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
All right, let's talk about the right kind of exercise for people who are over the age of 50. And I want you to think about two types of exercise: ballistic exercise and nutritive exercise. So ballistic activities have sudden accelerations and decelerations. And these are tough on ligaments and cartilage and muscles. These are the pounding types of exercise. Nutritive exercises involve repetitive stretching, big range of motions, balanced contraction of the joints. And these actually push more blood into the joints, and they're nutritive. So, ballistic, right? If Marshawn is putting his hand in your face, that's a ballistic. But also tennis, right? Jumping and lateral movement and the impact of the tennis ball on the racket. My brother-in-law is in the back of the room and is sad to see that eventually he's not going to be able to play tennis anymore. And running. And this was my all-time favorite activity for years and years until I got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. My knees couldn't hold up. And you will see people running into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. But in general, they tend to be small people. And my friend Chad in the back of the room, who runs 50 miles through the hills, he's about as big as I am, so enjoy it while you can. So nutritive, these are the things that are kind to your tissue. Nordic skiing, this is up in the Metau. Paddling, this is on the Hood Canal. Swimming. All right, so why so much aerobic? Why do we have to spend 4 days a week doing aerobic exercise? And the answer again is all those growth factors that we've talked about. That comes from aerobic exercise. And it builds your fitness. So it builds your heart and your lungs. We talked about that. It talks about blood vessels bigger, but it also causes more mitochondria. And I don't know how many of you remember your biology courses from high school, maybe from college, but this is a cell. In the middle of the cell, here's the nucleus. And on the outside, here are these little guys that are red in this picture, and these are the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the furnaces inside the cell. They are the things that take the food and turn it into energy. And what we see after you've been exercising 6 days a week, 1 hour a day, hard enough that it makes you sweat, if we were to take a biopsy of your tissues and look at them, you would have more mitochondria. So what does that mean? If this cell can burn 2 grains of sugar per hour, what can it burn if there are 6 mitochondria inside it? Well, 6 grains of sugar. So a very fit person who has a lot of cellular fitness actually burns more calories at rest than an unfit person. So why weights? This is completely different than high school. When I started lifting weights in high school and in college, it was all about bulking up and getting buff and having the right shape to my body. This is different. So weights build your joints, your tendons, your bones, and your proprioception. Proprioception is the nervous system inside your body that allows you to know where your joints are in space. So if you close your eyes and wiggle your finger, you know what's going on with that finger. That's proprioception. But it also has a huge amount to do with balance. And so working out on weights actually improves your balance. And I can't tell you how many of my patients over the age of about 60 come in and tell me they were walking down the street and the sidewalk came right up and smacked them in the face. Because as we age, we lose that proprioception. We're not quite as quick in our reflexes, and we just tip our toe on something and we're down in a way different than we used to be. So lifting weights is going to improve that. It's going to improve your balance. Nowhere up there does it say builds big muscles. That's not what we're interested in, right? We're interested in our joints. So it does build muscles, and that's good, but it's not important for longevity. So very different than high school, not about bulk. And I want you to think about lower weights with higher reps. You start low, you go slow, and this over here is the most important thing. This is a trainer. If you're going into the gym over the age of 40, you have to find one of these lovely people who are profoundly enthusiastic about the work they do in a gym. They want you to have fun. They want to start you slow. They don't want you to hurt. They want you to learn. These people become your friends. Get a trainer. Great investment. So, why should we not do this alone? Well, group exercise engages your social mammalian midbrain. It's limbic. Group exercise is more playful and more engaging. This is a group in an 8-man shell down on the Columbia. And it's harder to slack off in group exercise. How many people here have ever heard of panther circuits? Not many, a few. So this is panther circuits this morning. We were all in the gym at 6 a.m. and this is a group of people all about my age who are doing push-ups together. Why 1 BHAG per year? I just knew somebody was going to say that. So a BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. So my BHAG in 2018 was the Seattle to Portland bike ride. It's called the STP, 207 miles. And this is me and my friend Duncan at the starting line, which was at the University of Washington. And this is us cycling down through Tacoma on a beautiful sunny day with lots of happy people. And this is me at mile 188. It was 104 degrees. People were lined up. There was a nice lady who lived next to this little break station who had brought her garden hose over the fence and was just hosing people down. I seriously did not know if I was going to be able to finish the race. And this is me crossing the bridge into Portland. So, why a BHAG? That event pulls you forward. That event gets you out there and gets you going. My sister Joan and Salim went to Portugal this year to cycle their bikes across Portugal. That's the kind of thing that gets you out there training, it gets you into spin class, it gets you motivated. Because none of us have our sights on the Olympics, right? We're not going into the gym so that we can win some kind of medals. We just don't want to look stupid when we get out there with a big group of people. So I'm going to challenge each of you to sign up for some kind of an event. Sign up for something in April or in May, and it's going to pull you out there and get you moving. So, and remember, nobody cares how you do. I promise not a single person in the SDP this year cared how Malcolm Butler did in that event. The only person who cared was me. And there's only one rule. I know when I go into these events, I get all worried and afraid that something isn't going to go right or I'm going to be embarrassed. It doesn't matter. As long as I go all in, that's all I can do, right? So that's the one rule about these big events. You go all in and you have fun. One major outing per month. So once a month, I want you to have an adventure. I want to commit one day to your longevity. I want it to be outside. I want it to be with friends. Because it's way more fun than being in the gym. It's way, way, way more fun than being at home on your stationary bike. And it's actually why we live where we live. So this was a beautiful hike we took out on the Olympic coast a couple of summers ago. This is skiing with a bunch of my friends up at Whistler. This is Sheree and I mountain biking at Ancient Lakes. And this is a kayak trip we took up in Victoria. So why outside? Probably that's obvious to everybody. But we're shooting for physical health. We're going to get that through exercise. We're shooting for emotional health, and we're going to get that by group exercise and bonding with people. But we're also thinking about spiritual health. So it's healthy to connect to that part of you. Even if you aren't a person of faith or somebody who goes to church, we all have this spiritual component, right? So it's healthy to participate in something larger than yourself, and it's healthy to be inspired by awe and wonder. And there are lots of really good medical studies that demonstrate that time in nature leads to improved mental health, lower blood pressure, increased stress tolerance. So if you've had a terrible day at work and you spend an hour outside, you do better, and increased resilience. This is why in all big cities there are big parks, right? Central Park and other things in New York City. People have to be outside.
Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure. Pybus University, where learning is a lifelong adventure.
So we have three brains. We have our reptilian brain, the hind brain, that's this here in yellow. And this is the part of our brain that controls stuff we don't think about. Our blood pressure, our breathing, our temperature, our blood pressure. And then we have our mammalian brain, that's the midbrain. And this is the thing that we share with dogs and other mammals. And it's all about bonding and emotion and intuition. And then finally, we have the neocortex, or the forebrain. That's this thing that wraps around the outside. And that's the part, that's where we keep our intellect, where we do our executive function, our calculations, judgment, that sort of thing. So what we're interested in is that midbrain. And that midbrain is called the limbic system. And the limbic system is all about bonding. And so because you're a mammal and because you have that limbic midbrain, intimacy is not optional. We're pack animals. Infants raised in isolation die. So they did some incidental studies back in the 20s and 30s. Their opinion was that kids, young kids, are vulnerable to infection. And so if we isolate them by themselves, keep them away from grown-ups, they'll stay healthier. And in fact, they found that exactly the opposite was true. The kids who were kept apart from other humans and were not touched on a regular basis died. Another great study that was done, they looked at men who had had heart attacks, who were discharged from the hospital. and those that were discharged to home by themselves versus those who were discharged with family. And the men who were discharged to home after a heart attack with family lived twice as long as the men who were discharged alone. And that's not because necessarily their food was different or anything else was different. That's about the protection we get from intimacy and limbic connections. And what I know is that not everybody in the room is lucky enough to have an intimate partner necessarily. So I want to introduce you to this idea: sell your Lipitor and buy a puppy. So Dean Ornish, University of California, San Francisco, professor of cardiology, he's the guy who in the late 70s and 80s discovered that cholesterol levels were correlated with heart attacks. He's the guy who discovered that cholesterol builds up and forms plaques inside your blood vessels and can lead to heart attacks. I don't know how many of you remember the time when we weren't allowed to eat eggs because they were full of cholesterol, right? And they were going to give you a heart attack. Not true. But what you don't know about him, so, he discovers this and people create Lipitor, which is a cholesterol lowering medication, for those of you who don't know. And a lot of people took off running, and Big Pharma takes off running, makes all these medications. Dr. Ornish starts noticing these things about men who go home and live longer with their families, so he does more research. And what he discovered was that love and intimacy, those limbic connections, prevented more heart attacks than lowering cholesterol. And so he's the one who said it would make more sense for doctors to recommend a puppy than to prescribe Lipitor. But of course, there's no money in that, right? So what do? We prescribe Lipitor. So the other thing he discovered was that the quality of the connection is more important than the quantity. You need deep intimacy. The question that was asked was, does your spouse show they love you? And the folks, mostly men in these early studies, the folks who said, yes, my wife shows me that she loves me, lived longer than the folks who say, no, my spouse doesn't show me that she loves me. So deep intimacy is important. Facebook, social media, is not enough. Just knowing you have a broad network of friends, not enough. And I think it's really interesting also that dysfunctional relationships have the opposite, right? So if you're actually stuck in a very dysfunctional relationship, you will die sooner. Eat food, not too much, mostly green. Again, this is a quote from Michael Pollan's book, In Defense of Food. And he, in that book, has several rules about how we should eat. And one of them is eat only real food. And he defined real food as food that has less than 5 ingredients and something that your grandmother is what he said, but I said something that Martha Washington would recognize as food. This is not real food. This has about 32 ingredients on it, and it is brighter than the sun. So that's where my rule, never eat anything brighter than the sun, comes from. All right, the second rule that he talks about is to shop around the periphery of the grocery store. So I want to imagine whatever grocery store you shop at, we shop at Safeway. If you walk into Safeway and you turn left on 5th Street, you turn left, the first thing you hit is the floral department. Get past that. You're going to be in the fruits and vegetables. You're going to keep on walking. You're going to hit the meat and the fish. And then past that, you're going to hit the pharmacy, which is, of course, very important. Then you're going to get to the milk, and then the bread, and then the alcohol, and then Starbucks, equally important. Got all the major food groups right there around the outside of the shop. And so the point is, the aisles are going to kill you. The aisles is where all the processed foods are. So in the aisles, in processed foods, we use saturated fats. And we have to use saturated fats because they last a long time. They've got a huge shelf life. So things can sit on the shelf for weeks and weeks and weeks, and a Twinkie from 1954 is just as fresh as a Twinkie from this year, right? But it turns out that saturated fats will kill you, right? They just burn you up inside, and they plug up all the arteries where you don't need them to. Unsaturated fats, foods with unsaturated fats, are more natural, but they spoil. And so you have to buy them and eat them almost immediately. The other thing about the aisles is that they're full of intense flavors and colors. And so I want you to think about a little problem that our food industry has in this country. Any good company has to expand at about 10% per year. Most business people recognize 10% growth per year is about what we're shooting for. The population of the United States is expanding at 1% per year. So if today there's enough food being produced in this country for all of us to eat. And each of those companies has to grow by 10% in the next year. But the population is growing by only 1%. The only way to make that happen is for all of us to eat more every single year than we ate the last year. And how do they do that? They have to capture us with super strong flavors, bright colors, low prices, and it'll kill you. We got home in the evening, and dinner every single night lasted 3 hours. It's not just Thanksgiving 3 hours, every single night 3 hours. No time for TV. You're sitting around the table, eating incredible food, drinking wine, and talking for 3 hours. That's the limbic connection. About 50% of what we ate were fresh fruits and vegetables. The rest of it was high fiber, low fat, and they also had great olive oil, great wine, and great coffee. That's the Mediterranean diet. That's what's going to help you to live to be 100. All right, you survived it. Let's review again Malcolm's rules for longevity. Exercise hard, 6 days a week. Mix it up, make it fun. 4 days a week aerobic, 2 days a week weights, 1 day a week in a group. Use a monitor. Get limbic. Love, cuddle, play, or perish. Intimacy is not optional. Get a puppy. Only eat real food. Grocery shop around the periphery, and don't eat anything brighter than the sun. 1 BHAG each year, 1 major outing each month. And that's it.